Awesome. Well, like I said, thanks for coming on the weight room. It's cool to have somebody like you on to share your experiences because that's part of the whole thing. Share some information because there's a lot of people out there. I think that's one of the biggest things with fitness, health, nutrition, and then everything really is just can you get good information and can you spread it around effectively? It's something that this podcast really strives to do.
No, 100%. I appreciate you having me on, Daniel, and I hope we can get into some great conversation today.
That is the goal. So before we start things out too heavy, let's have you introduce yourself. Just tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about you.
Awesome. So I am Stephanie Mock. I am the Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Performance at the University of Pittsburgh now. Recently, I just moved up. I was the Director of Olympic Sports at Mississippi State University down in Starkville, Mississippi. And one thing that is unique about my role now at Pitt is with my position being sports performance, that means I am over strength conditioning plus sports science. I think sometimes people get confused. They're like, what is this new role that you have? Are you still training teams? Are you up in an administrative office? And I am still located in the weight room. I still am working with one team. So I'm still boots on the ground with that. But then also I do have a heavier hand with the administrative side of things and being in some higher level conversations. And it's nice because you can kind of really speak your mind and give your opinion on different situations that we see as strength coaches on a day-to-day basis that maybe administration or some of the other areas that are higher up don't really understand or know. So having a voice there is really important. And I'm excited about this new role I'm going into. I've been at Pitt for like 8 weeks now, so fairly new, but I've been at, I played volleyball at West Virginia University way back when. I'm from Pittsburgh originally, actually. Played volleyball at WVU, started in strength and conditioning there with football and Olympic sports. Then I went to Pitt, and that was in 2013 for the summer. And then I went down to Clemson. I started as an unpaid intern, and then a GA, and an assistant, and then assistant director. So I was there for 5 years. That's the longest I've been at one spot in old Tiger Town down yonder. And then took the director job at Mississippi State, and now I've gotten to Pitt. So I've kind of started north, went south, and then came back north again. So I made, I guess, a nice full circle.
Yeah, I bet Clemson was exciting to be at just recently with all the sports stuff that they have going on different. I mean, people think about football, but I think a lot of different sports have had some good success recently too.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was there in a very interesting time in a sense of, I was just at West Virginia helping with football. I'll never forget, we played Clemson in the Orange Bowl, and we ended up beating them like 70-30 or something. And then I never really knew where Clemson was because I'm from Pittsburgh originally, like I said. So whenever I made the leap of faith and moved down to South Carolina, I was there from 2013 to 2018. So I really saw when athletics really took off and football won that first national championship. Actually, the same year, men's soccer was in the national championship, and I was helping with them and won some ACC titles while I was there with like baseball, men's soccer, a bunch of sports really, track and field, all the above. So I was there kind of, it was a sleeping giant, one would say. So I was there through seeing that rise, and I was able to go into Mississippi State and a vision of, I had just kind of seen a program through because football had just split off from Olympic sports when I got to Clemson. I think I was the second intern class they had ever had with Olympic sports. So it was a fairly new Olympic. One, weight room was just getting built. So I saw that through. And then two, just kind of seeing the growth of the staff, the growth of the department. And I worked under two different directors while I was there. First director being Dennis Love. He had left my second year to go to the Denver Broncos and take a position. And that's when Rick Franzblau took over. So I got to see D-Love lead, Rick lead in two very different manners, but very successful. And then it allowed me to really cultivate and figure out how I wanted to lead a department as I stepped foot over to Starkville, Mississippi.
Dang, it sounds like a lot of exciting things going on. To kind of go back in time a little bit, though, how did you get into the world of sports and fitness, strength conditioning, all that stuff?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because both my parents really didn't play any sports or have anything to do with athletics. My dad like built homes and grew up on a farm, and then my mom is an accountant, so she's really big into numbers. So really didn't have it growing up. The one thing that I did have growing up in Pittsburgh was like, it's definitely a city that thrives off of sports between like the Pirates, which have never been so good, but we still pull for them, the Steelers, and then the Penguins. So I think just growing up in definitely a sports town or a sports city really allowed me to see like, man, I'm really interested in this. And then I did multiple sports growing up. I did gymnastics, track and field. I even bowled at one point, volleyball, all the above. And I really started to specialize in volleyball as I got to like, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. But one great thing that was with my parents not like really playing any sports, they were always like, just do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy, and never were like forcing my hand in something and like, you must play basketball and you must play at a D1 level. They're like, all right, do you love it? Like keep playing it. And then I got lucky enough that I got to play it at the college level. And then I knew I wanted to play at a Power 5 school. The one thing with me though is I am 5'3", so playing volleyball at a Power 5 level is definitely a steep challenge. A lot of people were like, there's no way, it's that and the other. I was like, I'll find a way. So I was a DS Libero at West Virginia. I got really lucky. I was like the first volleyball player from my high school at Butler, PA to really make it to a Power 5 level. So that was pretty cool. And played there for 4 years. And that's when I really knew, being 5'3", like my head coach told me the way that you can lead is in the weight room first and foremost, because I was a really hard worker. I knew I needed to capitalize on my physical capabilities to be able to keep up with the Amazon women that were coming in, that were a little bit more blessed in that regard. So I really capitalized in that area, not only like training wise, but leadership wise. And then from a work ethic standpoint. And then I was like, man, I really just love being in the weight room. So my senior year, going into my senior year, I was like, why not do an internship in strength and conditioning? Because I love it. I love being in the space. So that's when I really started. It was funny. I called my one mentor because he had left 2 years into my career playing there. He left to go to Michigan to be a football strength coach, Corey Twine. And I called him and I thought, like, when I would call him, I'd be like, hey, I want to be a strength coach. Like, you really had a big influence on my career. He was like, oh man, are you sure? Like, you should probably not. And I was like, wait, what? So he was kind of like making sure that I was aware of all the cons, to the field. Because it's really easy as a student athlete to see like all the pros. It's like, oh man, this job looks like so much fun. But he definitely gave me a fair warning. And it was just definitely an interesting call, because I thought I was calling him and he was like, heck yeah, let's ride. And he was like, I don't know if you really want to do this. So he really kind of tested me from the start. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, I've been it ever since. And I think we all know the hours that we work in strength and conditioning. It's definitely an area that you have to love, because it's a lot of hard work. But you do get to influence a lot of kids in a lot of really, really special ways. So
yeah, definitely. It's one of those positions where it from the outside, it seems like, oh, you get to be in the gym all day and work out and do all this fun stuff. But just from the little bit of experience that I have in it, it's so much behind the scenes stuff. Something that I find really interesting is like the experience of athletes who go on to play college and further sometimes is their high school strength conditioning experience. How was that for you?
yeah, to be honest, that's one thing that I'd love to be able to give back at some point to my high school, because growing up, everyone just kind of did the same program in the weight room. They're like, all right, here, like we didn't have a high school strength coach. It was just like our track coaches or our football coach, or this, that, and the other. It was just like a sport coach. It was never like facilitated, like this is your head strength conditioning coach for your high school. And the facilities weren't all that great. You'd like go in with clean hands and you come out and your hands were covered in rust. So this was pre-COVID times for sure, because I'm a little bit older, but yeah, like the platform was raised up, and yeah, it was definitely just a very rough and like tight weight room and not much square feet. And now I really like, it's funny you asked me that question, because I think back and I'm like, man, I think about like all the little things I want to change in the space that I'm in right now, or when I was at Mississippi State or Clemson, and I'm like, wait, I should probably be extremely thankful, because my weight room back in the day was not it. But that's where you really grow that love and appreciation. But yeah, it was just like my track or football coach at the high school that trained us. But it's interesting now how the field has really grown in certain states like the Texas of the world, or California or Florida. Some of these weight rooms that you see are nicer than college weight rooms. So it's definitely the world of high school strength and conditioning. It's getting hot at the right time. And I think it's definitely going to help us in the college realm of, as we get higher level strength coaches in the high school scene. I can think of a handful of people that I've worked with in the college setting that have gone to the high school realm. It'll make our jobs a tad bit easier when it comes to these high school athletes being educated. Hopefully their movement patterns are a little bit more sound and things like that.
Moving into your own experience, like your high school career, you said you didn't have too much of a set program. What was your biggest kind of like mind shift whenever you went from high school strength conditioning to college strength conditioning?
when I switched from high school to college, I just remember it just being like drinking from a fire hose, more or less. You know, it was like you got in the weight room and you're in there with girls that had been training in the weight room for 3 or 4 years, you know, in that college setting. And the pace of workouts and the expectations of catching on at such a fast rate, you know, it was like, hey, hop in and watch what the upperclassmen are doing and fall in suit or fall in line. And the one thing was, I was physically prepared at a pretty high level. I feel as if playing multiple sports, like running track and field, playing volleyball, doing gymnastics. So I did have some of that kinesthetic awareness and that coordination from doing skips, and actually pole vaulted as well. So I felt as if I was well-rounded, you know, but still that learning curve of we did a lot of Olympic lifting in college, and I'd never been exposed to that really in the high school realm. So that coordination aspect and catching on quick, and especially playing a sport like volleyball, like you go in there in the summer and you have 4 weeks and then you're in season, you know, versus if I was a spring sport, you know, or a winter sport, I feel like the learning curve, you have a little bit more time to get caught up. Being a fall sport like the soccers or a volleyball, it's definitely like 4 weeks, you better figure it out. And then you're in season and you're hoping you have a starting position on the court or the field. So I think it definitely was drinking from a fire hose in that regard, or that respect. But I was lucky enough to have a strength coach, Corey Twine, my first couple of years before he left to go to Michigan, that his expectations were really high for all of us, you know, and in the weight room, it was a very serious space where he would tell you something one time and he'd expect you to knock it out right away. He wasn't going to repeat it 5 times. So I think his discipline really showed me how to carry that over into practice as well. You know, whatever the situation may be, whatever coaches you were working with at practice, I think he really gave us those building blocks, because you're with that strength coach, especially for volleyball, for 4 weeks, really, before you even get to see your volleyball coach. So they really teach you the character pieces that are going to prepare you for once you start preseason. It's like, all right, in those 4 weeks, you need to figure out one, where everything is on campus, 2, what you should be eating, how frequently you should be eating, how training sessions are going to look like, getting up at 6 a.m. and then going to practice for 2 hours in the afternoon. Plus you usually work camp. So I think he really set the foundation for us to prepare for season that first year, that freshman year. But yeah, the learning curve was definitely steep, especially not having the most sound training in high school and going through like a ground zero or a block zero, you know, and really learning how the proper technique of squatting, hinging, all the above. So yeah, if I was exposed to possibly a little bit higher level training in high school, or even like I played on a travel volleyball team, and I know a lot of girls that we even train now that are basketball or all the above, like they hire someone to come work with their club. You know, we didn't have that back then. So I think the system's set up at a higher level now, you know, for some of these high school kids coming through. It's still not perfect, you know. Now we have kids specializing at an extremely young age. Like I said, like I benefited from playing so many different sports, that a lot of the stuff that was being taught, I was exposed to in different sports, versus some of these different kids are just specializing so early. And that's where you're seeing kids come in with a couple surgeries already. And then it's like, you're coming in your freshman year and you already have all these aches and pains. And it's like, now we're working backwards, taking 2 steps back to get 3 steps forward. So, you know, double-edged sword sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see those athletes who do have multiple sports under their belt, especially like track and field. It seems like those athletes who have track and field really do have an advantage of just knowing how to move their body in different ways a lot of times.
Yeah, way better rhythm coordination when you're teaching them some of the stuff like movement wise, you know. And even I've had, like, I talk about volleyball all the time because they're about to be in season right now, so I'm around them significantly. But I have volleyball players that played soccer, you know, in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, or ran track, and you can tell when looking at some of their heart rate data, their recovery abilities, or running like a submax beat test. You can see the exposure, whether it's those sports or a basketball, that they're pretty well rounded and didn't just play volleyball all year round. So there's a lot of pros to it, but I think so many parents, like I said, I was lucky I didn't have parents that pressed me super hard. There's so many parents out there that are pressing them like, all right, we're going to specialize in the sport from 6th grade on, because this is how you're going to get paid with the scholarship and things like that. So I think the longer you can keep kids in multiple sports, and I tell parents that on recruiting visits, the more they're gonna aid from that later on in their college experience, especially when they come in the weight room in our space for conditioning, strength training, and all the above.
Yeah, it's definitely the travel and year-round stuff presents just so many different, do you want to say necessarily like negatives? Because I guess there are negatives to it and positives, but I think it would be so interesting, and there might be something out there to kind of have a, like a study done on the real benefits versus the negatives, because certainly you're going to get better probably skill wise at a specific sport doing it year round. You're going to get better just mentally knowing different situations of the sport, doing it more. But then, like we're talking about right now, there's those negatives of the harm on the body, and the mental. A lot of times, there's mental struggle that goes along with playing the same sport with the same people, doing getting in the same routine every single day. It would just be interesting to see and to know what the overall, if it's overall good or overall bad for sports.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in that regard, especially in the sense of like you touched on it, the mental piece. We'll get kids that come in, they're all Under Armour All American and one of these awards, like McDonald's award, whatever you may see fit, coming into some of these Power Five schools that I've been at. And freshman year, they're already burned out because they've been playing their sport all year round. The mental side of things, and not even enjoying it anymore. And I'm like, wait, you have 4 more years of this sport at an even higher level with higher expectations. So I think the mental side of things definitely takes a toll, especially if you have that multiple influences. And now it's like we're dealing with the name, image, and likeness piece of now parents are going to be even more hard pressed to make sure their kids are succeeding at a higher level in that one sport, because now it's all not only a scholarship, but there's money riding on it, even outside of that. So I think it's going to become increasingly more stressful on these student athletes and create more anxiety. And I think the mental piece, and not only like the strength conditioning side of things in high school, but they're going to start to possibly need more sports psychologists to really look at the mental side of the game, because the stressors are become higher and higher, especially on like the footballs of the world and men's basketball and even baseball. Like it's just going to continue to heighten, and managing that stress is going to become important, especially at such a young age.
And do you see specifically, have you had any, when you first heard, hey, this is a thing now, the name, image, and likeness, what do you think that is really going to be the outcome of this?
Yeah, no, I think it's something that, of course, we have to face head on, and I think our athletic department did a really good job before it was released, educating us as leaders in our departments of how to help navigate the student athletes with some of these conversations. Especially one thing that we see in our realm is like a lot of the different like things at GNC, right? Like the supplements, and whether it's like Bucked Up or like some of the energy drinks, understanding that, hey, if you're representing some of these different companies in particular, making sure that they follow in suit with our drug testing policies, so it's like, oh man, I get represented by Celsius energy drink. And it's like, well, don't you know that you guys get tested for a certain level of caffeine or what's in some of these different pre-workouts, or use like just understanding and educating the student athletes on, yeah, it may be cool when you can make a couple bucks, but make sure that this is falling in suit with our performance and NCAA policies and procedures. So I think it's definitely an opportunity that I think kids can capitalize on, but also it's our job to make sure we're educating them before they kind of sign the dotted line of, hey, is this something that falls in line with our performance goals, and expectations, and something that isn't going to affect you 10 years down the road, whenever if they're taking certain pictures of you and it may not look professional, and then you go for a job down the road, and then that's biting you in the tail, because we all know everything stays on the internet, so if you take one picture with some type of like supplement or whatever else, and it doesn't seem to fall suit, like later on 5 years down the road, you're trying to play for a pro team and they're like, they see a couple of things, or you're trying to get a high level job and they're like, I don't know about that. Like, that's not a really good representation. I think just being aware of how it can affect you professionally down the road, and then also in the moment when it comes to especially like we've seen a lot of supplements like come out of the woodworks and be like, we want to represent you, you know, and it's like, wait, you can't be taking that daily working out because you won't pass your drug test. So I think that's just one area in particular that we've kind of see rise up and try to really contact the student athletes across like multiple schools. I've kind of been in conversation. So something that's really good, but also you just got to make sure that you're picking something that is on brand and appropriate for what your job is on a day-to-day basis when it comes to being a student athlete.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that at all. That's a really good point. That's definitely, I think, going to be it's going to change college sports so much in the next few years. And I think it's going to level off eventually, and we're just going to kind of get used to it as we do everything. But for the next few years, I think it's just going to be so different. I think it's going to be interesting to see for sure. Within the strength and conditioning side of things, what major change or changes have you seen since you have been an athlete going in versus now?
Yeah, I would say when I was an athlete, it was still like the old school model of you had the football strength coach training like an Olympic team. That was the setup. So I've definitely seen the staffing rise, the ratios of student athlete to strength coach ratios definitely go in a positive direction. And even to a point when I was at Mississippi State and the SEC, like so many SEC schools not only had the basketball strength coaches, like the 5 football, but also like one for baseball. And then on the Olympic side, we were lucky to have like 2 teams per strength coach, one that was in season in the fall and one was in season in the spring. So I think the attention to detail and the ability for the strength coach to be a little bit more involved, whether it's traveling, whether it's being out at practice for warm up and cool down, and things like that. I'd still like to see, like, of course, me being in a leadership role, like salaries continue to rise. You know, we can't be paying people pennies for their whole entire career. And that's why we see a lot of turnover in staffs, but also like people are so hungry to chomp at the bit to hop in and take someone's place and get paid 30 grand. And it's like, well, crap, we want to create a little bit more respect for our field. And so I think I like to see that change. I think also these, especially as people start with the name, image, and likeness, there's all these consultants out there, you know, that like, oh, I'm a speed coach, or I'm a conditioning specialist, or I do this, or I do that. And I think just being aware of who's out there and continuing to make sure that we're on cutting edge like research and doing education to be the best strength coach we can be, and making sure we're explaining why to our student athletes, because consultants are trying to make money all over the place, you know, and get into the college setting, especially in the Power 5 level. So making sure that with these consultants that you have something set up as an infrastructure within your university of like, all right, if this head coach wants to work with this conditioning specialist over here, like how are we assessing whether or not they would be a good fit to come work with this team? You know, what kind of certifications do they have? What other programs have they worked with historically? What does that look like? What were the relationships like? Do they understand like how are they going to fit into the performance model that we have in place already in the performance team meetings? So they got to come on campus, you know? So I think really the consulting world has become a lot bigger, whether it's like you see, especially with baseball, like the drive lines of the world doing detailed assessment, kind of like flying out to your university and taking your baseball team through, or different people that specialize in like PRI that'll fly in and do some testing, or TPI. So I think the consulting world's only going to continue to grow, and you just have to make sure as a strength coach, you're staying on the cutting edge and really doing a lot of reading and educating and taking continuing education and professional development serious, you know, getting out there. Of course, we're dealing with COVID right now, so traveling is not really the easiest thing, but once COVID hopefully dies down, like getting out and going to different facilities and educating yourself and networking in a sense of educating and pushing your development forward. It's not just getting out there just to meet people and blow your name up. It's actually getting out there so you can bring great information back to your school and educate the rest of your staff.
Just kind of seems like it's transitioning higher and higher into being more respected, because I think it's been known from the sports level that this stuff is helpful, but being more respected and getting that salary, you know, increase where it really should be. It's tough, I think, whenever you look at coaches, you know, head coaches, assistant coaches, and going to the pro level athletes who are getting, you know, paid millions of dollars, and then, you know, who's keeping those people healthy, I think it should be looked at certainly a lot more.
Yeah, the field's definitely saturated 100% in the sense of everyone's trying to come in and make a name for themselves, and making sure that, like, we preach at Pitt, the student athlete experience, comes first, and making sure we're taking care of those kids. And it's not like we're sitting on our phones, like marketing ourselves, to try to make a buck. So I think making sure that we keep, like, we even have like an Instagram page for Pitt Sports Performance, but it's literally based off of like continuing education, like what are we looking into, how are we bettering ourselves, and then trying to bring in great people to join our team, our performance team. So, hey, these are the things that we're doing. Like, is this something that aligns with your thought process? Like, come intern with us, and trying to get like-minded people under the same roof. But I think a lot of people are like trying to, especially over this last year with COVID and everyone being locked inside, they're all like, oh, we're like, people are starting to work out more on the whole Peloton thing. And it's definitely becoming commercialized. And I think even like my family over the holidays were asking me more questions about fitness and what they could do. And I think there were a lot of bad things that came out of COVID, but a few good things in a sense of people were reflecting on like their health, because they had a little more time to do it. So they were like, all right, what workouts can I do? Because I'm bored inside. I can't go anywhere. So I think, but yeah, on the flip side of things, people that aren't even certified and this, that, and the other are putting videos out on Instagram of like, you should do this 30-minute workout, but they have no business putting stuff up because they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just copying and pasting something that they saw online or on a YouTube channel or whatever else. And it's just like the kids, especially the student athletes, are just becoming so overwhelmed with so much information that sometimes that's why we really have to educate them on why we're doing things in the weight room, because they'll be like, well, that looked fun that we saw on Instagram, like that, like Versa Climber class, in this glow in the dark room, or that spin class. And it's like, all right, guys, but we're focusing on performance. So sometimes you have to really sell things and educate them and get them to understand the process, but that only helps them out later on. If they go on to play pro, they're like, all right, I can kind of weed through the BS versus the real training, and know what practitioners that I can trust. And I think really going into the next 5 to 10 years, especially over COVID, but the virtual training piece, the virtual assessment, like David Gray that's overseas, and even Jonas Dodu, they have like some online training options for different clubs or for individuals. And I think that's going to become even bigger over the next 5 to 10 years, of people just creating these online training programs that people can purchase and kind of do wherever they would like. So I think that's the next wave. But yeah, definitely the fitness industry is booming right now. It's the time to get in, but depends on like what area of fitness, college, private sector, high school, like you mentioned earlier, or kind of like the Insta famous workout channels, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different aspects, and they're just growing and growing. You have the performance side, you have the weight loss, the bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, just tons of different ways to train. And like you said, athletes see different things on Instagram or whatever. They hear it from their friends like, oh, this, I thought this would be a good idea. And that kind of brings me to my next question, is just like, as a coach, and it's, I'm sure there's tons of different funny things you hear, but what's kind of like some crazy things you hear just as questions from athletes?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that I still see that is just such like a pain in my tail, and I really try to educate, is just the female athletes that come in and they never lifted a weight, and they just assume if they touch the weights, they're going to blow up. Like, that's still something, or a stigma that we deal with all of the time. Like, whether it's the Soccers of the world, like the track and field girls that I may get from Jamaica, they like look at the weights, they're like, I'm going to explode. I'm going to become massive. And I'm like, guys, listen. So I think just like culturally or historically, certain teams that like the girls just look at the weights and they're like, there's no way, I can't touch that. Like, I can't do over this amount of reps because my coach in high school told me this, that, and the other. So I think that's just like the craziest thing that I hear about consistently, and talking even with sport coaches too. They still think that like their girls are going to blow up or get slower. And it's just like, just the education process of performance and getting people to understand that. But I'm trying to think of anything that's like funny in particular. I think just like athletes sometimes feel confident that they're pointing at the right muscle groups. And I had an athlete the other day point at their quad and they're like, my hamstrings are huge. And I'm like, that's not your hamstring. Like, what are you doing? So I think they get excited to like see their muscles of course growing and their bodies making that transformation, but then they just don't even. I'm like, what have I taught you? Get it together. They're like, oh, I meant that. I'm like, oh man, still have work to do.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing is I think the idea that when you do some lifting of weights, it's like you're gonna bulk up. And I think it's funny
Yeah.
because like people, there's whole industries and whole like communities that wish that were true. You know, if it were that easy, you know, if it really is that easy for you, I would say, hey, let's point you in this other direction because you're a genetic animal and you need to go do this. Like if it is that easy, then you're in luck, kind of thing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Lucky
know,
you. I'm
'cause
jealous.
there's so many people out there who, train their whole life just to do what you think's going to happen within a week.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. They'll slow down because they're lifting weights. Yeah. They're getting heavy and they can't move as fast. I'm like, man, we still have some room for improvement here.
Definitely. Yeah. There's, even though like we were talking about, there's so much information out there. It's just about pointing people in the right direction.
Yeah.
As a strength coach, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think one of the biggest things is creating the culture. And by that I just mean just to help people understand the importance of it, to help people work hard, or how are people going to work hard? Here's what we're going to do, in this part of the day when we're in here. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to act. Here's how we're going to talk to each other here. All these different things, creating a culture. How do you kind of do that on a generalized scale? Because there's so many different aspects to it, but how do you do that with people that are, new athletes that are coming in?
Yeah. I mean, I actually, walking into that now when it comes down to taking over a department, I'm coming in and taking over 16 different teams, and I'm over the whole entire strength and conditioning department in the sense of what our core values going to be for the weight room, and the one big thing is I talked to the staff already and I was like, hey, what do you deem or see important as core values for your teams and also personally, because a lot of the time there's things overlap, and a lot of the key words that I got just from, we can even ask the sport coaches, what are your expectations of the weight room? What do you hold extremely important? Making sure that we have core values that the coaches, the staff, and the student athletes remember. So like sometimes it's super corny. They'll base it off like an acronym, and be like, oh, Tigers, or Steel City. And it's like, man, I can't base my core values off of like letters that are given to me. So keeping it simple, like I said, so the kids remember it, and also like enforcing it and embracing it. And one thing that we do is like we pick a student athlete, male and female, of the month, and then we give them like a bracelet or a t-shirt to help them really embrace these core values and make it part of their lifestyle on a day-to-day basis, and also help in their sport. So one is train and compete with intent and purpose. The second one's dominate the other 20 hours of the day, and then hold yourself and your teammates accountable. So those are three things that we embody. And I always work on to, like when I was at Mississippi State, putting them up on the wall, so the kids see it on a daily basis, or same with that pet. I'm actually redoing a bunch of the graphics to kind of make the space my own. So just making sure that we put it in places that the kids see it, like on the PowerPoints in the weight room. And then also making sure that like all the performance staffs know like what we embody and what's our purpose, but really creating a culture driven situation when it comes to coming into the weight room. Everyone has the same core values and see eye to eye. And I think it makes it a special place. There's not many places on campus where you go into the weight room, we're all living off of the same core values, like they all go to their own practice spaces, and every head coach has like, these are my core values, these are mine, or this is my culture. And it's like, no, you come into the weight room and everybody's like, it's an even playing field. Everyone's embracing these core values, but who's going to do it at the highest level, and the big thing with dominate the other 20 hours of the day is like, it's not only what you're doing in the weight room, but it's what you're doing outside the weight room. So you have 24 hours in the day, you're usually practicing 3 hours, lifting 1. So what are you doing academically? What are you doing when it comes to nutrition, sleep, the mental side of things? So I think making sure you loop that into your culture as well in the weight room to show that it's not just about like when we see you, doing your sets and reps, but it's also what you're doing outside of here will affect your performance at a high level. So I think as a director or like assistant AD, like in my role, it's important to lay the law down of what our expectations are and then getting everybody on board and holding them accountable to it. So
Yeah, I think that's just such a big responsibility right there, because it's everything when it comes to not just the weight room and the, that aspect of it, but you're like you kind of mentioned with the sports that go in there first, and you get to see them before they're coaches. It's like that's where somebody could be, really shaped before they even go to their real sport. So I think that's important, but from the aspect of keeping things fun and keeping things interesting, I think that's another important aspect, because, nobody is, as much as you want somebody to come in and just enjoy it as much as we do, not everybody's going to do that. And even if the culture is great, somebody can still come in there and get bored after, 15 minutes or whatever. So or even after doing, a program for a few weeks. So how do you try to keep things interesting for the athletes?
yeah, definitely change the monotony, right? So I think I like to change the warm-ups up a lot, and keep them guessing with some different exercises. If you keep doing the same warm-up over and over and over again, yeah, it's going to get quite monotonous. Also, like even today, I think about our lifting session with volleyball, like using things like the gym aware, to drive intent behind all their reps, because every rep is being recorded, and I think the small sound of like the ding when you hit the velocity on the barbell, like the girls get super excited. So I think that's one thing that helps drive intent, is utilizing different pieces of technology, or even with like the force plates. I've used Force Stacks and Hawken now, but creating leaderboards, every week, and like kind of creating some hype behind it. Like if you test on Monday, on Tuesday, when you come in, like make it a big ordeal. Like, all right, coming in third place for like jump height, creating some fun behind it, especially as you get in season. Like, and hopefully you're with a team that wins a lot, because that helps. But if you're with a team that's not as successful, or kind of like building, I like to call it, maybe you're a cellar dweller and you're trying to like build up, your process goals may look a little bit different than a team that's always gone to like the College Cup or the Elite Eight. So trying to create some different performance-based goals. And then of course, like competitions, always fun. It could be like different types of competition. It could be more on the mental side of things, or it could just be like brute strength. So depending on the team, like I help with wrestling as well. So like what like the warm-ups or the competition look like with wrestling versus with volleyball may look a little bit different. But I think those are just some different examples. I think you can definitely, people think about like the technology in such an analytical way, of like, I'm going to punch this into my AMS system and then I'm going to make changes off practice. It's like, actually, no, you can use a lot of your tech to like drive performance and competition and get kids excited. And then they embrace the numbers even more. You don't want to become obsessed over it, because you want to make sure like technically you will be able to play your sport. If you're killing all the force plates, like relative to body weight, that's one thing. But if you can't play soccer or whatever else, like we're in trouble. But I think driving that competitive nature, whenever you're testing and things like that. And then you're gonna get their best effort. It's not just like them going through the motions every day. So I think those are just a few examples that I've done.
I think the technology aspect is so cool. Just all the cool things that you're exposed to at a college and at a professional level. Some high schools maybe too, but like the average person never really gets to experience that kind of thing. Most likely they're going to, their local gym or whatever, even if they're somebody who really likes to work out and do that kind of thing. They don't really, I don't think, understand what's out there when it comes to measurements and making adjustments and all these different things that the technology now can allow for. I just think it's one of the most exciting kind of aspects whenever we see, because usually with technology that means there's interest and there's money going into it. So it's really, I think, just the door opening to what the future looks like when it comes to not just the weight room, but the recovery side of things. And I think that's one thing where some people think, okay, we've not maximize the benefits of the weight room, but we're learning so much now. Let's look to what we're not doing well or not doing to the most benefit, and maybe recovery and maybe sleep. Do you see anything growing in either of those two areas, in the recovery and sleep aspect of the performance side of things?
Yeah, big time. It's funny because we're actually we're building a new performance complex at Pitt. I'm designing it right now. And recovery rooms have become like a big to-do, like whether you see in like Alabama, they put out pictures of like the chairs with the Normatec boots lined up and like the red laser therapy that you could do and float tanks and like all these different things that are out there. And really just educating, understanding like why and timing of when to do these things. And then also like whose umbrella do these recovery modalities fall like under? Because I think the biggest thing is like, we're building a facility right now and it's like, all right, where do we put the DEXA? Does that go with sports science? Does that go in their lab or does it go with nutrition? Like, and then with the float tanks, like who's gonna take care of the float tanks and the salt? Because there's a lot of upkeep, like, oh, everyone's just kind of like putting stuff under sports science at this point because they don't want to do it. But it's like, wait, where does this actually fall and whose responsibility? And like when you're looking at the training week and trying to look at like, all right, what day should we do cryo? What day should we do this? Like, when's a good time? Like in the off season, should we be using any of these things or should we just let them actually like adapt on their own or the nap pod? So I think the recovery modalities have become huge. It's just like everyone's trying to figure out like who's in charge of it, right? Because they don't want to be in charge of it. It's like, well, wait, if I'm running lifting sessions and I have 2 teams, my other team wants to get in recovery and I'm like, clearly we're not staffed to the level that like athletic training and sports med, like they have like 1 trainer per team, but then also they're like doing treatment after practice. So they can't be manning float tanks. So like, who does this come down to? But I think recovery is definitely something that people are putting in new facilities. It's like, hey, as you flow in, like there's athletic training, then there's like some type of fueling area to grab breakfast. And there's the weight room and sports science is looped in there with testing. And then you flow to like the recovery area and nutrition. So I think it's like, all right, the flow of the space, everyone's including the recovery area, but I think it's just figuring out who's in charge of it. And then also, I've seen a bunch of different sleep wearables and utilized it with different athletes. So I've utilized fatigue science. We had like 60 bands when I was at Clemson. We also used Omega Wave even before fatigue science. And it's really like what fits best into your daily schedule with the student athletes that you're not being too invasive, and I know over the COVID last year, like the NBA got really big into the Oura ring and looking at heart rate variability, and that's pretty easy. But like my volleyball players wearing that when they're playing, not the best idea, right? Rings will be flying off everywhere, but you don't have to wear it really at night. I mean, if you want to get the more data you can collect, the better. But the Oura ring, the Whoop bands, I think depending on your relationship with the mental side of thing, and then like your team physicians and athletic training, and like really trying to figure out who's going to manage the sleep data. And then also, is this going to be a little bit too invasive, and tapping into the student athlete's personal time, that has to be something that you handle in an intelligent manner, that you're not forcing them to wear it. It can be like voluntary, like, hey, we have 60 Whoop bands, like who wants one? First come, first serve. And you come sign up, and then you sign a waiver saying, if I lose this, I pay for it. And then off you go. And I think who gets to see the information is also vital, because some sport coaches can handle seeing the information and some cannot, but like you kind of have to make it a blanket statement of like, all right, we're collecting this data for just the performance team only. If we see something that's like an outlier or extremely important dimension to you as a sport coach, like we'll let you know. But I think sometimes sport coaches and even like performance staff members, it's like, how are you handling having conversations about the data? Like you see a student athlete getting 3 hours of sleep for 5 nights in a row. Are you going and screaming at them and saying like, you need to get sleep, da, 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 da? Or are you going into the situation and you're like, hey, like, let's talk about what's going on, or you kind of like message your sports psychologist and you're like, hey, can you meet with Susie Q? Because I've seen her sleep average is 3 hours a night, and that clearly isn't going to help her with performance, especially at a cognitive level. So, and then also like wellness questionnaires, sometimes people are like, I have to buy a sleep wearable. And it's like, well, maybe you don't have the capacity or the budget to do that. So I think wellness questionnaires, just making sure that you're creating a space that kids feel like they can be honest about answering these questions, and they're not going to get cussed out, more or less. It's an honest space. And then also you'll kind of like partner them with the right people to get the right help. But handling the data is important, along with creating the reporting system and lines that kids aren't like losing sleep over, oh my gosh, should I turn wellness in? Like I had to turn it in by this time. And now they're getting more anxiety about it. And now like their mood's changing because they're anxious about answering it. So I think you definitely have to look at your department as a whole and like what teams can handle the capacity of doing a lot of this different stuff, what teams are built up to this point, and not really throwing the whole kitchen sink at a team that's never used any tech at all. Maybe just start with like testing on the force plates, and then you can slowly add one thing or two things each year as you see they can handle it in their space or capacity.
Gosh, there's so many aspects of technology and science that go into it now. And it seems like, just with that right there, what you were talking about, it seems like if you've never been into the weight room in a college setting or a pro setting, you'd expect to walk in and see the strength conditioning coaches in white labs and, and things like that. And then they go back and after they're done with their science responsibilities, they go into and they're mathematicians with the data. It's crazy how much information and knowledge you have to have and keeping up with the research and all these different things as a coach when it comes to performance, because it's like that thing you were talking about, the what do you do in the other 20 hours. We're just realizing how important those 20 hours really are, and if you're not doing those right, what's the real benefit of the hour or whatever you're getting in the strength conditioning room. And it kind of brings up a question in my own head, like, when we look back 30 years ago at strength conditioning coaches, they didn't have all this stuff. They maybe even didn't have as much information as we have. I would say certainly not as much information as we have. Just kind of the level of almost intuition that they had to use, and the difference. I guess it's just a different skill set almost. And hopefully, those intuitive skills are still in play, but like just how much more they had to use them, how much more they had to be in touch with each athlete, instead of being like, oh, their heart rate's this way. It's almost like, how can we know that without actually seeing the data? I just think it's interesting how far we've come in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think there's like, if you look at the S&C world, some people have just completely shifted hard right in the sense of like they live by the numbers, and the numbers tell the story and that's it. And then some strength coaches are like, I'm not shifting towards sports science. Like I'm staying old school. Any piece of tech, like I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole, and I think the perfect medium is just meeting it in the middle. You got to trust like what you see, right? Like the numbers are going to help tell the story, but at the end of the day, like you're creating and collecting all these metrics to make data informed decisions, not data driven decisions, so just the data should be backing you in a sense of like, I'm thinking this, but like actually the data is even just making sure that I'm that much more right, and objectively it's helping me with the subjective side of this, what I'm seeing with the coach's eye, which I should trust. But then also if I have the numbers to back it as well, because some sport coaches need the numbers, they're data driven, especially like a lot of their technical savvy and recruiting. And then also like when they're scouting, they're looking at percentages and they're looking at this and they're looking at that. And they're like, all right, if they see the same thing in our realm, they're going to trust it even more so. So I think depending on your head coach, kind of understanding what they respect and what they value is important. But yeah, I think my philosophy has always been with the sports science world, like I said, making those data informed decisions, but not data driven decisions. I think that's where people take that hard right and get the whole way. And it's like, especially if you're dealing with a head sport coach that's like never really seen sports science or never collected any data, and you're trying to like 100% push them down this rabbit hole. It's like, you could possibly hurt that relationship and you can't come back from it to a certain degree. Or the next strength coach comes in or sports scientist and they're like trying to fix the mess that you created. So.
Yeah. Gosh, there's just, the future of strength conditioning. It's going to be interesting because I think there's the potential to have such a big impact on so many people. The obviously the athletes who are going to go on and play professionally or do what the next level is for them, but also this potential to have an educational value to those athletes who are just going to go and live a non-athletic life after this. Go do whatever else they're doing, because now they're going to understand more about health and more about diet, more about recovery, more about sleep, and all these things. I think if we could push that down to the high school level as well, to really just educate as many people as possible, because I don't think we're getting it very much in the school system. I think if we could use the strength conditioning aspect to just push those healthier messages along, I think that would go such a long way, and for future generations to see just a turnaround. Obviously, we have such a big issue with obesity and obesity-related illnesses and diabetes and all these different things. If we could swing those in the opposite direction using strength conditioning.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, even like dietitians that I know in the pro setting or the college setting, have kind of shifted and taken, let's say, like a high school job, and they're like the dietitian and the strength coach. They're trying to add giving classes in the school system to educate the students that they can, like in the high school, like 9 through 12 level, that they can take whatever class that they have and help educate them on some of these different things that we see if you're going to go, especially be an athlete at the next level, on the college level, to help prepare them for that. Trying to fit it into your coursework at school is an intelligent way to go about it, but not all schools are offering that just yet. So I think it's something that is a great idea, but also it's going to take some people pushing the envelope and pushing that message.
To kind of close things out, I guess, do you have any clear, career, end of career, not to like end of career, but, to getting towards your end of career goals, like, hey, this is what I want to achieve in my strength and conditioning career, in my performance career?
Yeah. It's crazy to think now, because I think back to like younger Stephanie Mock, and especially when I was at Clemson, because I remember my first boss, Vilo, asked me, he's like, what's your end goal? Like, what do you want to be? And I told him I want to be like a director of strength and conditioning or a head strength coach. And he had told me like, all right, I'm going to hold you to that. Like, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire day in, day out. And he did before he left to go to the Denver Broncos. So, and then Rick came in behind and did the same thing. And I think younger Stephanie made the mistake of like, I had this like age in my head, like, all right, by age of 25 or 27, like I have to be a head strength coach, like, or I've failed myself. And I got corrected by my mentor at the time. He's like, that's not what it's about. It's about like the day-to-day process of when you're at a place, making sure that like you're capitalizing on the resources you have around you. You're reading every day, like you're creating good habits, you're asking good questions, high-level questions. And as long as you're at a position, you're continuing to learn. You're not becoming stagnant. Like there's no reason just up and leave for any apparent reason, and that's what I saw at Clemson. I was there for 5 years because I felt like I was still continuing to grow and learn, and I haven't plateaued yet. And I had great resources and great people around me to support me. So I was like, all right, it was really a hard decision. Like when that director position did come, that offer from Mississippi State, I was like, man, I'm still at a place and I'm still learning so much. And I still have more to learn. That I think sometimes when different coaches call me for advice, whether they're like a full-time coach, whether they're a GA or this, that, and the other, or they're another director, it's like, what are you looking for when you're in this leadership role, or an assistant role, to know like when's the right time to make the next step, and I've gotten really lucky in my career that I've stayed extremely present in my current role. And I was never someone that was like on the job websites, like scrolling and looking for like the next hot thing. Right. I've always been lucky enough to like put the work in where I was currently at, and like people would call me because of the work that I was doing, and I think a lot of people are getting caught up into like marketing themselves and constantly networking and trying to like meet people all the time. They're like not focusing on their day-to-day tasks and roles. Like, what am I doing for my current teams, my current sport coaches, the staff? And I'm really big on like this new role that I took on at Pitt. I knew it was a bigger step, bigger responsibilities. I'm over more teams. I'm over 16 teams before I was over 9, more macro level. I'm over more full-time staff members. I'm hiring more full-time staff, but my big thing is like, I want to be part of an organization or an institution that I feel supported as in the strength and conditioning department, whether it's financially, whether it's personnel, whether it's my budget, whether it's we're building a new performance facility for me to continue to learn, and then hiring great people around me, but being supported by administration and also being supported by my staff around me, and continuing to surround myself with people that want to learn, want to push the envelope, don't want to be stagnant. I think just surrounding yourself with like-minded people that are hungry to learn, and just excited about the field and enjoy coming into work every day as much as they can. And maybe I'm having a bad day and somebody else on the staff is going to push me. But I think just being around people that are trustworthy and loyal and having that support is huge at that current role. And I've succeeded in a sense of I always told myself I wanted to be a director. I did that at Mississippi State. And now I'm an assistant AD for sports performance. But I think as long as I'm around like a performance team, an administration that are pushing the envelope and want to be the best and they'll do anything to do it, and support the continuing education process. If I'm in a place I'm supported, like that's a great thing. If I'm at a place that things are starting to get stagnant and people don't want to grow and don't want to learn and aren't really trying to push the envelope, then I'm like, all right, maybe it's time for me to make that next step, So I think people right now in the field are just so eager to like up and leave, just like jump ship and go work somewhere else for whether it's like the logo on the shirt, or $5,000 more or this, that, and the other. And it's like, man, if you're at a spot that you feel supported, from administration, and then if you feel supported by your staff, like that goes a long way. And like just kind of putting your time in and really developing. Like it's a cool feeling whenever you can see a freshman like the whole way through their collegiate career through senior year and go off and graduate and you were part of that long-term athlete development. Like not many people are seeing that anymore, because they're out of school for 2 years and then they bounce. And even me, like I was at Clemson for 5, I was at Mississippi State for 3, and now I'm going to Pitt. Like I think people are leaving places in 1 year, 2 years. I left at 3, so I can't really see too much, but I think it's becoming a field of just an arms race of like, where can I go to next and get more support and more resources and this, that, and the other. And it's like, just continue to stay at a place and evolve and take on teams that you never had before and challenge yourself. And I know this is a very long-winded answer, but I don't know. I'm definitely in a role now that like I went from being an assistant director and like working under the head person. And that's nice because you don't have to handle all the headaches. You don't have literally the whole weight of the program falling on you. And I knew my big why is like get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm like, all right, if I go take this leadership role, like I'm going to be really uncomfortable, but I'm going to grow significantly in a small period of time. And I was a head person for 3 years, and now I've jumped into this even bigger role at Pitt, because I was like, all right, I'm getting a little bit comfortable. Like, how can I really push the next step? And then this role came open, and now getting uncomfortable again, forcing me to learn and kind of create and cultivate some new systems in a sense of I'm over more weight rooms, I'm over more student athletes, I'm over more staff, I'm over hiring sports scientists. Like it's definitely, and I'm over building out a whole new facility again. So this time from the ground up, like meeting with the architect. So I think if you're at a place and you feel like you tapped it out and you haven't learned anymore, it's like, or you can't learn anymore, it's time to move on. But yeah, I'm just really big on being present, investing in my people, because now I'm in a leadership role and it's my job to give back and make sure that my assistants and GAs and paid interns are all getting mentored and taken care of how they should be. So I think if you're in a leadership role, really empowering that and taking care of your people. And then if I take care of the people around me and the teams and the coaches, great things will happen. And who knows kind of what door will open next type of thing. And just surrounding myself with people that I can trust,
Well, it sounds like there's definitely a lot of exciting things going on, and look forward to keeping up with it. And if you want to share with where people can keep up with you and any other pages you would like to share, you can feel free to do that.
Yeah, no, I have a few different handles here. So my email is at smock@athletics.pitt.edu. So if you want to reach out via email, that works great. And then Instagram for Pitt at Pitt Sports Performance. You can follow us there, or at Mock Stephanie is my personal Instagram page as well. And then my Twitter is at Coach Steph Mock. So if you want to follow me there, but yeah, that's a little expanded knowledge of Twitter, Instagram, and email. So I'm sure we'll get that down there somewhere, Daniel, for the people to find it. But thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. It was good to get to talk to you and really kind of grow my knowledge base on what's going on out there in the world of college strength conditioning and performance, because it sounds like it's exciting. It sounds like it's growing, and I'm excited to see the product, what we get to see on TV and on the field and all these things. I'm excited. So, keep up the good work, and yeah, you're doing great.
Awesome. Thanks. Gal to Pitt.